Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into a topic that sits right smack at the intersection of sustainability and profitability in commercial real estate. I mean, think about it. When you realize that buildings account for roughly 40% of all global energy consumption, the stakes become incredibly clear. We're looking at the authoritative industry standards today to figure out how the built environment is evolving, and more importantly, how that evolution impacts the bottom line.
But first, I want to start by asking you a question. When you look at an income-producing property, whether it's a massive towering office building, a sprawling retail center, or even a residential complex, what is the most overlooked driver of its total value today? Let's think about that for a second. The answer? It's energy management. And look, we aren't just talking about checking off a few regulatory boxes here or, swapping out some light bulbs so everyone feels good. Based on the hard industry data, this is really about unlocking hidden asset value. It's a fundamental operational lever that directly dictates a property's financial performance. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to cover 5 things. First, the real estate energy challenge. Then, the impact on operating costs, how this drives modern tenant demand, tracking the SASB metrics, and finally, boosting total asset value. Just to make sure our analysis is totally grounded in reality, we're relying on the standardized playbook from the SASB standards, which are actually now part of the IFRS Foundation. Think of this as the definitive, globally recognized framework that investors use to figure out exactly how sustainability affects things like cash flows, access to finance, and cost of capital. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Real Estate Energy Challenge.
Commercial buildings absolutely demand a massive energy load to run. We're talking space heating, ventilating, air conditioning, keeping the lights on, and powering all that internal equipment. So where does all that power actually come from? Well, the framework outlines 3 primary sources. Grid electricity does the heavy lifting for sure. It's the predominant form of consumed energy. But then you have on-site fuel combustion, so think of things like natural gas for your winter heating. And finally, renewable energy production. They all play critical roles. Now, the exact mix varies a ton depending on the asset class, the location, and local building codes. But honestly, no matter what that mix looks like, managing this footprint is a massive, unavoidable issue for the industry.
Which brings us to Section 2, the impact on operating costs.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the shared financial vulnerability inside any commercial building. Energy consumption doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It translates directly into massive operating expenses. The SASB framework actually separates this into 2 categories. First, you have the base building, which is the energy used to supply central building services and common areas. Then you've got the tenant space, which is the actual lettable floor area occupied by the tenants. So whether the real estate owner assumes direct responsibility for the energy costs or allocates them straight to the occupants, both the landlord and the tenant are totally exposed to financial risk from things like energy pricing volatility and general rate hikes. This creates a mutual incentive to find economically attractive capital investments for efficiency. Let's shift gears and look at things from the occupant's perspective in Section 3, driving modern tenant demand.
You might assume that if a landlord just passes all the energy costs on to the tenant, the landlord doesn't really need to care about efficiency. But that is a very dangerous assumption. Let me read you this quote straight from the standard. Building energy performance is a notable driver of tenant demand because it allows them to control operating costs, mitigate potential environmental impacts, and maintain a reputation for resource conservation. Notice those key verbs: control, mitigate, maintain. This right here proves that sustainability is absolutely non-negotiable for modern tenants. It dictates their leasing decisions. If your building is an energy hog, modern tenants are just going to look elsewhere, and that directly threatens your rental and occupancy rates.
So if it's this critical, how do investors actually measure it? That brings us to Section 4, tracking the SASB metrics. So the crucial point is that investors need standardized data. They don't want vague promises. The core SaaS metrics require entities to disclose exactly what their data coverage is as a percentage of total floor area. They track everything: total energy consumed all the way down to the gigajoule, the exact percentage of grid electricity versus renewables, and even the percentage of the portfolio with an Energy Star rating. If it powers a light bulb, there's a metric for it. And honestly, one of the most important things they track is something called like-for-like percentage change.
Let's actually zoom in on that one for a second, known in the code as IF-RE-130A.3. Like-for-like percentage change is the standardized calculation that compares the energy consumed in the current reporting period to the immediately prior period. Actually, scratch that. It's not just a simple comparison. Here is the genius part. It strictly excludes properties that were acquired, sold, under development, or went through major renovations during that time.
By stripping out all that noise, it shows investors the true, unfiltered operational efficiency gains of the stable portfolio. It reveals actual management performance. But hey, data alone isn't enough, right? It actually has to inform your strategy. Under metric IFRE 13085, entities have to describe how they bake these considerations into their operational playbook. This means establishing hard energy reduction targets from the jump, then embedding those metrics directly into the acquisition due diligence process. So actually using the data to adjust occupancy projections before you even buy. After that, it involves deploying technical building assessments to find new efficiency opportunities and using rigorous data management systems to constantly monitor and benchmark your buildings. Investors love this because it proves the property isn't just coasting, it's being actively optimized. And that takes us to our final section, boosting total asset value. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole point. We're connecting sustainability metrics directly to hard financial returns. It all comes down to this clear value equation at the heart of the SASB standards. When you implement effective energy management, your operational result is reduced operating costs, which immediately gives you the financial payoff of higher profit margins. Then, when you invest in energy efficiency improvements, you mitigate your regulatory risks, which ultimately protects your long-term asset value. And as we just talked about, high energy performance directly increases tenant demand, which means higher rental and occupancy rates. Those are the primary drivers of a building's revenue. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Is your real estate portfolio literally leaving money on the table by ignoring its energy footprint? Energy management isn't just a peripheral, feel-good environmental issue anymore. It is a core financial strategy. Understanding and applying this framework is exactly how modern real estate professionals capture that hidden value. I highly encourage you to dive a little deeper into the ISSB and SASB standards to see how you can apply these metrics to your own assets. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and keep looking for that value beneath the surface.